Greetings! Anton here. Hope you're all doing well. I am still under the weather, sadly, but on the mend slowly. So today we're actually going to be going over what I've been working on this past week, mostly in sketchbooks, notebooks, and such, which is the redesign and polishing for Take and Hold that I want to work on this year, especially in this first chunk of the year. Obviously, it's been just about the most successful sort of mode in the game. Has gotten pretty much the most playtime from folks, and so it's something I always want to approach very carefully to not possibly mess up elements of the formula, while at the same time giving you folks what you want in terms of both things from the sort of options sort of category of things, but also from the objectives category of things. And thankfully, with the Kappa Coliseum this past holiday time, I got a whole lot of information about sort of which ones of the various sort of score competitive modes that folks enjoyed the most and played the most by just looking at, you know, how many high scores of various types were there, and just getting feedback as to like what worked really well and what was like pretty fun and what was like that's not so fun. So I want to try to fold some of the most successful and relevant ideas from those modes back into Take and Hold, while also fixing stuff that needs fixing. So we're gonna sort of approach this in several categories to talk about sort of what my current working plan is, that I of course want feedback from you folks about. So we're going to go over sort of overall system stuff for it. We're going to go over talk about agents. We're going to talk about the take phase of the mode. We're going to talk about the hold phase of the mode, obviously. And then we're lastly going to talk about the level itself. Cool. So let's talk about the overall structure of the mode first. Sort of like what is the overall objective going to be? Is it just going to remain this sort of endless thing like it's been, or is it going to terminate and actually have a sort of a ramp up to a sort of more of an ending? And the answer to that is that this is one of those things that I want to provide several sort of top level options for, that will be paired with a scoreboard, not unlike the way the Kappa Coliseum has worked. There'll probably be something akin to like 4 core options, likely, which is whether or not you're playing in a sort of spawn lock mode where you can just infinitely draw out more magazines and individual rounds for what you're using, versus some sort of limited ammo context. And then the second axis of it will likely be whether you're playing towards a finite end of some type, probably something along the lines of like 10 waves. There might be several granulated options. I know a lot of folks really liked that there was a short play mode option for the Kappa Coliseum. Like, I just want to get in, I want to play really intensely for like 5 to 8 minutes, and then I want to be done. So what I might consider doing is having something like short, standard, long, and endless as sort of 4 cadences that you can play Take and Hold in. With 2 columns for like limited ammo or not limited ammo. And then each of those 8 would have a scoreboard for them. You might ask with something like that, well then, considering you can also configure things like how much life you have, whether the bullets on the agents are fast or not, and things like that, how would that work with a scoring mode? And this will probably take some iteration to get right. But the idea I have is to basically assign scoring multipliers to each of those things. So an example basically being that like the greatest amount of health you could start with would just be, well, you know, might be just 1.0 to your score, might actually be a scoring penalty, and then having something closer to like a human amount of health might give you like 3x to your score or something like that. Obviously, some people might not like the idea of that, but I think the difference, because of the permutation space, I don't want to create a system where there's like 200 separate scoreboards for every with every permutation of the settings, so you don't end up even competing against each other. So there's obviously going to have to be some whether I restrict some of the options, or I'm going to have to basically break it up into a bunch of different scoreboards somehow. And the idea I have right now to make that a sane amount of them is to basically have base modes and then sort of mutators to them that give you scoring bonuses or penalties. So yeah, so that's the overall thing that I'm thinking of in terms of what the macro structure of Take and Hold will be in its sort of finalized version. So let's talk about agents. So with the agents, obviously probably the single most common question I get asked these days is, when are the SOSIG agents going to be in Take and Hold? And the answer to that is, hopefully I should be ready to do a test with them probably within the next month or so. I'm going to probably, in the currently existing Take and Hold level, enable some sort of beta option that you can switch over to them that will be just about testing, that will substitute them in sort of like for like. The same number of them will spawn in each wave cadence to begin with, so that I can see how hard that is, how hard various people find it to be. It might be harder, it might be easier. They might get caught on things navigation-wise. I have no idea yet. But I have decided I'm going to give you access to that in a rougher state so I can start getting information and feedback back from you folks sooner rather than later with that. Obviously, there's some stuff that needs to be done to the SOSIG's AI, and basically the two major categories of concern that I have for them is making them a little more likely to try to find and stay behind cover points that I'm going to try to generate dynamically instead of laying them all out by hand, because that's super tedious and makes it way more labor intensive for me to produce a new level. And in addition to that, I want to make it so that when they're essentially a melee agent, that they stick to their target a little better. Right now, like you can see it, if you spawn like 10 SOSIGs and give them all melee weapons, they sort of all run past each other a lot instead of just taking target, sort of strikes of opportunity at a target. So that's something I still need to fix without making their cognition too expensive. So, but that's basically what I want to do on the SOSIG front. A bunch of the other agents that exist, say, in containment and show up in Rotwieners, or at least some of them do, are all at various stages of, they work, but they're not really balanced, and some of them aren't as fun to play against as they could be. The turret should have a way more nuanced damage model instead of just this one very annoying and hard to hit weak point, so I want to fix that. Same that the dumples are a little improved, but those could be better, and the meat crabs are mostly fine, but I want to make it so that you can actually impale them with melee weapons as well. So that's basic. That's the rough agent plan, and where I'm going to start, of course, is adding a sort of beta option into Take and Hold for having SOSIG spawn instead of regular agents, probably in the classic level first. Cool. So let's talk about the take phase of the game. Now, this is one of those things that is a little bifurcated because the issues with the take phase are different whether we're talking about the classic Take and Hold level or containment. With the classic Take and Hold level, the pacing is right, but I still think not enough interesting things take place during that. One of the big things that frankly put getting SOSIGs working will allow me to do is have patrols function, not unlike the way they do in Rotwieners, where a take phase will begin, 1 to 2 patrols, sort of a group of SOSIGs would spawn somewhere in the level, and they would have a dynamically generated but sort of fixed looping patrol pattern through the level, so you could get sort of surprised by them moving through an area, or even if you're, rifling through a supply point, you could get sort of ambushed by them in a generative sort of way. With containment, this is a little bit larger of a problem in that most of that, and this is sort of a larger issue, most of that mode or levels problems stem from the fact that it's just not a very well-designed layout. I think I was more concerned when I was playing around with it with scale and seeing how many assets I could have loaded at once without performance issues, and that should have gotten a few more iterations on paper before I actually built it out. So I'm probably going to scrap that layout entirely, but I'm going to leave it online until I have something more interesting to replace it with. But I definitely think that the ideal size for a take and hold level is a little larger than the classic level, but certainly smaller than containment, because there's just too much moving around without not enough other things happening in that level, and I'm aware of it. And then, in addition, in the take phase, what I'd really like to add is essentially some more item loot play without things getting too convoluted. I'd like there to be sort of more small looting opportunities. A lot of folks have mentioned that attachments don't show up enough in take and hold. Alternate melee weapons don't show up enough. It's primarily just guns and some mags for them. And this is going to be even more important if this mode needs to support a limited ammunition mode, that there needs to essentially be a looting channel that can be turned low and aimed towards attachments in the sort of standard mode for it, but can be turned up a little more and aimed more towards ammunition, extra mags or reload-o-matics or things like that, in a limited ammo version of things. So, and then lastly, I'd like, especially to prevent sort of item bloat, I'd like there to be some sort of recycling or trading system present. So say you're in a supply point, you open up a container, you're like, ooh, I want to use this rifle. I don't really need this SMG. There should be some way right in the supply point to essentially discard and bank that weapon, sort of removing the asset from the scene for performance reasons, but also sort of giving you back something for it that gives you a reason to hold on to weapons that are on the edge of usefulness a little longer. Cool, and that's pretty much what I'm thinking in terms of the take phase. In terms of the hold phase, there's basically two sides of what I'm thinking needs alteration or refinement. One of them is just straight up layout. Like obviously, like I would say that containment's hold points are far better designed than the classic levels, despite the fact that the overall layout of the map is too large, is too sprawling, is too confusing. I tried to really respond to people's complaints about the hold points in the classic level, which were way more haphazardly. They were sort of designed before there was even a game in that level. Obviously, the problem with the classic level is that there are far too many points that effectively have threats coming at you between like 120 and 180 degrees opposed, and there's not enough cover for you to be able to act sensibly. So your best option is oftentimes just like trying to back into a corner and snap shoot a threat, which sort of collapses the tactical interest that can be taking place in those points. So obviously whatever the sort of next iteration of things is going to just need intelligently laid out hold points. But beyond that, there's a conceptual problem that exists with some of the larger hold points, which is that the agents storm in, and if the player just hides and doesn't fire their gun in certain circumstances, the agents just mull around being like, why did we storm into this room? What's going on? So what I'm currently thinking, and I'd love feedback from you folks on this, which is the idea that hold points will actually have some sort of thing that is attempting to be attacked by the agents. So if the agent sees both you and that thing, if they're both active threats, the agents will prioritize attacking you, but if they don't see you, they'll attack that thing, and that each point would sort of have life that would tick down, which would add a sort of another type of hard failure to the mode, other than you getting killed. And either you would just sort of fail that point and not get the points for it, or possibly not get supply points refreshed, or it would just end. I don't know what's the sensible thing to do there yet. That will probably require a little bit of experimentation. But I would like it to feel like there's an objective. You are actually defending something instead of merely trying to survive being locked into that room for a certain amount of time. And thankfully, that's not that difficult of a change. This is yet another reason to try to switch over to the SOSIGs, because the Mark II bots that are in Taken Hold basically can only see the player and react to them, whereas the SOSIGs can track and fight n number of targets across n number of factions. And so they would actually be able to support that type of gameplay. And then lastly, in terms of just the overall structure and the level itself, first off, for the non-endless versions of the mode, I do think there should be a sort of climax at the end that is more than just I spam you with a bunch of enemies. I don't know yet what this would exactly entail, whether I can simply give a SOSIG, say, a ton of speed, a little more health, and a really cool weapon, and see if that would actually be an interesting challenge, or whether I would need to create something more bespoke for that sort of boss, call it a boss fight, if you will. It's something I want to experiment with. Obviously, building the sort of Metal Gear Rex boss fight over the holidays was really fun. Doing something that was closer to a pattern boss, I think, actually works really well when they're a bullet sponge, if the space that you're fighting them in is large enough. But at the same time, just having weird and interesting mixes of sort of melee and ranged SOSIGs and alternate, turrets and things like that could also be an interesting challenge. I don't know yet. But I am aware that basically that Taken Hold is essentially going to need a third and a sort of a final level, something that would fundamentally replace the classic level and containment together and fulfill what folks like about both of them. It would still probably use the same tile set, but as I said, more interesting layout, more considered defense point orientation, and possibly some broken out areas that feel, if not outdoors, but pseudo outdoors. I think I can make that work with the way my lighting works. So, but that's basically the direction that I'm taking things in. I've already been drawing out sketches for the layout of the level, and it's something that I'm probably going to workshop in our community Discord before I start laying it out in Unity, just to see what folks think, because I know there are a number of folks who've done modding on games and are really into FPS level layout and such. So it's something that this time I want to take. This is something I don't want to have to redo again. I'd like to make a level that can work in a bunch of different permutations of this mode, not unlike the Kappa Coliseum arenas, but a little more complex like. So yeah, but that's the plan. I would love to hear feedback from you folks, especially like if you've got short comments, drop them in the YouTube comments here. If you've got a sort of a longer thing that you'd like to convey about this entire plan and what you might think of any of its elements, pop on over to the Reddit thread linked down here in the description on /r/H3VR. I would love to know what you think. But yeah, so it's as much as being sick has kind of stunk the past 2 weeks, it's been nice to sort of slowly come back into working on H3 and not just jump right into code and right into technical challenges and things, but actually spend some dedicated design time figuring out what it will take to polish and just make really solid and make this sort of final version of Taken Hold something you could easily put a couple hundred hours into and still enjoy. So yeah. Well, I hope I hope all of you are not sick like I am, and I hope you all have a wonderful week, and hopefully, assuming I'm feeling better, we should have an update next week. I'm probably going to start with the melee stuff, getting it into the item spawner and upgrading some of the existing melee weapons with the stabby and logi stuff. So I hope you're all excited for that. I'm certainly excited to get back to work. So wish you all the best. Peace.